What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the channel. If you're a return viewer, if this is your first time, welcome. My name is Sean Noriega. I am a competitive powerlifter and powerlifting coach, and I also attended MIT for my undergraduate career from 2014 to 2018. This is the second episode of the series of my experience at MIT. If you guys have watched the first video, it was more of a long form video. I think it was about 45 minutes, maybe even an hour. I can't recall exactly. However, I spent that time answering a ton of questions that you guys had, such as how I managed balancing my time, how I went about making the decision to pivot into powerlifting coaching, all that sort of stuff. If you're interested, go back and watch the first video so you can catch up. I was inspired by a friend to make this series more short form so that I can put out videos more frequently. So each one of these videos going forward, I will be addressing a singular question that I got multiple times when I polled my Instagram followers for questions for this video. And I just want to keep a constant flow here. The goal of today's video is to discuss how I essentially got on the path of going to MIT, all the steps that I took in high school and even before then to kind of build up to this point, any sort of tips for high schoolers looking to get into higher level universities and how to navigate the application process, as well as for those in college and how to navigate that ever stressful question of what am I going to major in, what am I going to do when I grow up, and how to essentially traverse that path. So without further ado, I'm going to get into this question, which was, what did I do in high school to prepare to go to MIT? Did I know that I always wanted to do this? And then how did I find a major? This question was repeatedly asked in all different varieties of that wording. And I figured that this would be a good one because I do have a very large follower base in high school and in college. That's really the majority of my viewers for powerlifting. And obviously many of you that age are also looking to get into school, some of you wanting to go to higher end schools. And if those of you watching are not involved in powerlifting, obviously this video is also for you, as I'll be trying to give as much insight into my experience and then just general advice going forward. So before I get into what I did in high school, I do have to talk about what happened in my academic career prior to high school. Now, this is a very unique opportunity that I had that many people are not going to have access to, but I think that it's worth spending the time to give the backstory so that I can get to the point of explaining, what I think are steps that anybody can take in general to make sure that they can get into the university that they want to and how to navigate university when you're there. So I attended public school in high school, but I also attended public school as a kid for elementary school. And around third grade, I was very unhappy with school. I found that it was just very easy. I was, subjected to the same examinations as a lot of other kids, and I would act out. I would get very bored in class. I would, cause trouble, all that sort of stuff. And I would come home every day pretty much complaining how much I hated, obviously I didn't word it this way, but I hated the public school system because of how it was treating me, I guess. It was very difficult for me to be stimulated in school. And where I live in Long Island, there's a school called Long Island School for the Gifted that my parents had found out about. It's honestly interesting because I wonder if a school format like this could even exist or be birthed in today's age, just with how things are going politically. But the acceptance process is very cut and dry. You had to be administered an IQ test, and you needed to score above 132. Like that was the bottom line and threshold for being accepted into this school. So I went and got an IQ test. Obviously was accepted and started attending the school from 4th to 9th grade. And the entire structure of the school was to basically accelerate kids, anywhere from 1 to 3 years above their current grade level curriculum. So, for example, you could have been taking algebra as early as 5th or 6th grade, pre-calculus in 8th or 9th grade, that kind of deal. And it was a multidisciplinary school, so it wasn't just advanced in the STEM courses. It was also advanced in history and English, just exposing us to a lot of different things really early. And that experience was at times not the most enjoyable for me, just because I had so many friends growing up who obviously I did not attend school with. There were a lot of friends that I played baseball with who I couldn't see on a regular basis. Also, this school did not have athletics. So when a lot of my friends from middle school were going through the process of playing middle school sports, I didn't get that. I only had my travel baseball season. But in hindsight, and not even in hindsight now, but, just even in high school, I very quickly learned that this was probably the best opportunity I could have gotten in my life. And I'm very grateful to my parents for it because of how advanced the curriculum was. And the reason I say that is that it gave me the opportunity once I got to high school to take so many more courses early on and pretty much max out the capacity of what I could take as a high school student. I got to high school having finished, all of the I guess, honors level classes. By the time I was done with 8th grade, I had taken up to pre-calc, taken up to physics and science. I had taken the history and English classes that were standard for my age a year early. So as I mentioned, science and math were accelerated like 3 years. The English and history were accelerated about a year. So when I got to high school, I was essentially able to take AP classes as a sophomore, along with other seniors, and then do the same thing for the successive years until I graduated. So to summarize, I ended up graduating with, I think, 15 AP classes. It was AP Chem, AP Physics B and C, AP Calc BC, AP Stat, Gov, Econ, English, both Englishes, histories, you name it, right? I was able to load up my course load in that regard. And, my first piece of advice, now that I've kind of summarized that bit, is that I think that in order to really bolster your resume for these top schools, it's important for you to take advantage of all the academic rigor that is offered. So grades obviously are important. To give you insight, I think I graduated with like a 97.5 unweighted average. There were obviously plenty of kids in my class who had much higher averages, kids who had 98s, 99s, stuff like that. But I definitely had the most intense course load out of the, however many hundreds of kids that I graduated with. And I have my private school experience to thank for that. But regardless of if you have an experience like this or not, I think that it's definitely worth challenging yourself in your academics over just going for an easy grade. That definitely set me apart from other kids, because if you think about the admissions process, all of these schools are getting applications from your school every single year. So what's going to happen is they are going to essentially have this log of and concept of what is available to a student in a given area or given school district, and then what they take of that, right? Because you're going to have kids who get into the same school as you, who maybe didn't take as many AP courses as you were able to take, but they took all that was offered in their area. Like, I have plenty of friends that I went to school with who, when they got to MIT, were struggling a bit with some calc stuff because they just didn't have the highest AP calc class offered at their school, right? So really just taking the maximum amount of rigor is, I think, what sets you apart from a course load standpoint when applying to these schools. And you very well could fall into that category where your school does not offer as much, right? So if you're in a situation like I was, where my high school, which by the way was a public high school, did offer so many different AP classes, taking advantage of that, I think, is really worth it. And having the ability to show them on a transcript, like, yeah, this kid loaded up, especially your junior year, because for those of you who know, when you apply, you submit your applications, at least for early admission, after junior year. So really having a beefed up transcript going into that is really advantageous. So showing that you challenge yourself, right? Showing that you can excel broadly, right? So that you have good breadth, but also, maybe there's something that you are definitely more inclined to. For example, for me, I was given the opportunity to excel 3 years ahead from my middle school in the sciences. So when I applied to MIT, which is obviously a tech school, I had all the APs done. I also had taken a multivariable class outside of my high school curriculum because it was just offered separately. So just having having and taking advantage of those opportunities, I think, is really, really useful. And like I said, for those of you who may not have as much variety in terms of course load, just taking everything that you can. If your school offers one AP of each science, like just take that, right? Challenge yourself. And if there are any opportunities you have, off campus or extracurricularly, then take advantage of those as well when it comes to course load. I would say the one thing that set me apart, not necessarily in a negative way, but certainly something that I didn't do that a lot of kids did do who end up at these schools, is research. I played baseball. I played baseball from the age of 4 years old all the way up until my freshman year of college. And that was what I did every summer, right? And all of my friends, the teachers of my AP classes, tried to convince me to spend my summers doing research. And I couldn't be bothered. It was not something I was interested in at all. The amount of tournaments that we went on wouldn't have even allowed it if I wanted to. It just wasn't something I was interested in. And I think that that's okay, right? I think that so many people get caught up in getting involved in all of these different things in high school. And while you do need to show that you are academically inclined, that you are challenging yourself, I think that feigning interest in things, it's not an advantage, because you're not going to excel in things that you do not have a genuine interest in. I think that the fact that I did play baseball as long as I did, the fact that I was all county for 3 years, the fact that I was a baseball captain my senior year, like all of those things, while it's not academic, right, it shows, diversity. It shows passion in something else. So if you have that something else, right, don't let go of that. Don't let the academics diminish it, right? Focus on your course load. Do everything that you can from an academic side of things. But if you have a sport you play, an instrument you play, you like acting, you like robotics, whatever, like do that and do it to the fullest, right? Like whenever you have your free time that you want to dedicate toward that, like have something to show for it when you apply, right? That was me with baseball. With clubs, to give you guys an idea, I was in a club called Athletes Helping Athletes. So that played to the, athletic side. We would go to the elementary schools and like mentor these younger kids, which was really rewarding. I love working with kids. So that was a great experience for me. But the main things that I was involved in, I was president of the Spanish club, which I think looked good on my resume as well. Obviously, I am Hispanic, so that definitely shows like leadership within a community, if you want to call it that. But I think when it comes to clubs, a lot of kids my age, I remember in high school, were just involved in a million different clubs. Like it was insane. They just wanted to join every club just to show that they were everywhere. And I think that in reality, these schools see through that. Right? They know who's joining clubs because it's easy to get photographed there and have it on your transcript. But they see who is genuinely in a club because they want to be in it. They want to help progress the well-being of that club at the school. And that was the case for me, right? I was involved in, I think, 2 or 3 clubs. The third one is escaping me right now. But yeah, that was essentially my setup. So like I mentioned, I took, all of the AP classes pretty much that my school offered, I think with the exception of like music and art, honestly, and then other languages, because I did Spanish. I didn't do French or Italian or whatever else was offered. I played baseball. I had powerlifting on my resume, even though back then I was not as advanced in powerlifting. But those were like the central things. It was that I excelled grade-wise, but I also had the academic rigor. I showed interest in being in a high level of a club that was like personally tied to my identity. And then I also excelled in a sport to the level of, being recognized within the state and being a team captain and stuff like that. So they want to see that leadership. They want to see you challenging yourself. They want to see that accountability. So going through the application process for me, because somebody asked, when did you know you wanted to go to MIT? I actually did not. I didn't at all. Academics for me was something I was interested in out of the pure, I guess, joy of problem solving, and just challenging myself in a general sense. But I was never one of those kids who was like really drawn to robotics or really drawn to planes or really drawn to cars or really drawn to math. It was just that I was good at all of these things and I enjoyed them in a class setting for the most part. But I never had any affinity toward any specific school or any specific major. So what ended up leading to me going to MIT, ironically, was baseball. I had applied or planned on applying to pretty much all of the Ivy League schools with the exception of Cornell. I was being recruited by a lot of the Ivy League schools, specifically Harvard and Columbia, which are also D1 programs. I had essentially been in talks with those two schools for the entirety of the summer leading into senior year, at which point both of them essentially just ghosted me, which one of the reasons I know why was they ended up picking up, Columbia that is, ended up picking up one of my good friends who was, a very good baseball player. So that was that. MIT still expressed interest, and with sports, if you're not aware, a lot of D1 schools recruit. So if they recruit you and refer your name to the admissions office, like, you're pretty much in. But MIT does not do that. MIT pretty much gives no credence to a coach's word. So like if a coach favors you and wants you at the school, it pretty much does nothing for you outside of just what being an athlete does for your transcript. I remember, in fact, when I went on my recruiting visit, there were two other kids with me who were both legacies, meaning that both their parents attended MIT, as did my father, and neither of them got in. So they had legacy on their side, they had baseball on their side, and it ended up not panning out for them. So I knew that if I wanted to get in to MIT, it made the most sense to apply early, because while, like I said, it doesn't necessarily give you a guarantee, if the coaches recognize that you are expressing interest, I think that it can't necessarily hurt. I think they'd probably not recommend your name if you were to wait and defer it. Or defer it to regular admission, that is. So maybe I would have gotten in regular. I mean, I'm fairly confident that I would have gotten in regular if I'm being totally honest, but I did not want to take any chances because I ended up actually liking MIT so much. So brings me back to what I said about baseball, which is that I went on a recruiting visit to MIT and I stayed at the fraternity that I ended up being a member of for all 4 years of college. And at that time, that house was predominantly baseball players, and I absolutely loved it. Like the way that they introduced me to the school, the people, just who they were in general. It really made it made me gravitate toward the school. Like I was in love with it essentially, and not necessarily the university itself, but the people and kind of the conversations that I was having. Like it was very abnormal in a good way for me to converse with people the way that I did those students coming from, a public school, right? And I think just in general, people who are older, much more intellectually mature, and that drew me. So to give you guys an idea, because I'm sure many of you are, trying to figure out where to apply and when to apply where, my dream school was actually not MIT before this point. My dream school was Stanford. And I ended up, long story short, not getting into Stanford. The odds of getting in were better if you applied early for Stanford. Like I mentioned, it made more sense to me to apply early to MIT and then keep my application in for Stanford. So people have asked me all the time, where did I apply? So I had all of the, Common App and supplemental stuff done for the, pretty much like I said, all the Ivies, Harvard, Brown, Dartmouth, Columbia, Yale, Princeton, and Stanford. And after I got into MIT early, I just didn't send in any of the Ivies applications. I just sent in Stanford. And I told myself that I had gotten into Stanford, I would go there. And if I didn't, obviously my only option at that point would be MIT. And I was confident with leaving it that way because I was so fond of MIT. So like I mentioned, long story short, did not get into Stanford, ended up at MIT. I'm going to circle back for a second because, you guys have asked, like, what do you do, to make sure that you line yourself up best to get in? And I did mention everything I just did before. But one thing I didn't cover was standardized testing. There are some schools now which aren't even really giving as much credence to standardized testing as they have in the past. But I'm here to tell you that I truly do not believe that your standardized test scores matter that much, if really at all. I mean, within reason, right? There's definitely a threshold above which, your intelligence is reflected, right? Meaning that, we know that you're smart enough to get in if you're above this score. It's not necessary that you have a perfect score, but like you're probably, the rest of your transcript probably doesn't correlate with being worthy of getting into the school if your, SAT or ACT were just well below, the median, right? But I digress. I really don't think it matters that much, especially if those other things are in check. I knew plenty of kids who attended my high school. I know plenty of kids who were in like those college Facebook groups who had perfect SATs, who had perfect ACTs, and didn't get into where they wanted to go. And I think it really goes back to what I mentioned before about taking advantage of your rigor that's available at your school, but then also like cementing who you are as a person. Like, what are your values? What are your passions? How do you add to the culture of the school, right? Because any of these universities can pluck a kid with a perfect SAT or a perfect, GPA, but it's like, that doesn't make you special, right? That's kind of like the baseline for the student body, the incoming student body, right? Like, you're all exceptional academically. What sets you apart? And I think that I had the things that I mentioned to set me apart. Full disclosure, I got a 2240 on the SAT, and I got, I think, a 33 on the ACT, if I remember correctly. I remember taking a couple practice tests for the SAT and like scoring well above 23 and some perfects. I think I took like 3 or 4 practice tests. And I remember being so angry when I got back my SAT score, thinking it was the end of the world, when in reality it was not. The ACT, I ended up getting a perfect score on 3 of the sections except the reading section, which I couldn't even finish. I was a very, very slow reader in high school and essentially just had to guess on the last section, and my score definitely reflected that on the reading section. But it, like I said, it really didn't matter. Like, it definitely helps to have those high standardized test scores. And, if you are, in this pool of kids who is capable of getting into a high-end school, take a couple practice tests, review some of the tricks, and, because there are like certain sections where like the language used in questions is very telling, and there are keywords and passages and all that sort of stuff. But you should be fine. You really should be fine. So that's standardized testing, right? That's kind of what, that's my perception of it. And I think that that's honestly like the university's perception of it, especially as we're seeing some schools kind of, turn away from really heavily weighting these standardized tests. So that brings me into like, how did I know what I wanted to study? And I didn't. I really didn't. MIT did not do Common App, which for those of you who don't know, that's like the common application that you send to all schools. There are essay choices on there that if you apply to any school, you send that in, and then any school might have a supplemental. But MIT didn't even take Common App. Like, they were just like, all right, we just want our supplemental. And I remember on it, I wanted to do chemistry. Chemistry was my favorite subject in school. I took so many chemistry classes throughout school just because of the middle school that I went to. I was part of like the American Chemical Society, like all this nerdy shit. And that's what I wanted to do. I really wanted to do chemistry. And when I got to MIT, through talking to people, through like actually looking at MIT's like courseware and seeing what the trajectory would be for classes as well as career paths, I realized that was not what I wanted to do. Because when you're that young, you don't really have a concept of like what your just genuine interest for the sake of learning leads into in terms of actual professions. So that was a very quick flip. I really didn't know. As you guys know, I ended up majoring in mechanical engineering. That was determined after my freshman year. I think I spoke about this in the first video, but it was really kind of, you know what, it's broad enough kind of thing. Let's do it. So my advice to those of you who are unsure is to not panic, and feel like you need to make a decision. But I think it's important to know what to factor in to make these decisions. Because, you know, if you're in a situation where you're taking out loans to go somewhere, maybe financial aid is only partial. If you're in a situation essentially where graduating college might leave you in debt, and it might leave you in debt for an extended period of time, I think you have to be wary of, you know, just majoring in something because you like it. Because the job market is not getting any easier for anyone to get jobs. Like, it's funny because so many people, when they hear that you went to MIT or you went to Harvard or whatever, they're like, oh, you could get a job anywhere. It's like, nah, fam. Like, I graduated with people and know people who graduated before me who would come back and stay at MIT for months at a time because they couldn't find a job. Like, they were staying with friends because they just could not compete in the market that was available at the time. And it's not that they were dumb students. It's not that they were lazy students. It genuinely is just very, very difficult. So I think if you are in that situation, it's incredibly important that you are looking at this from the standpoint of, where can I do good work? Where can I feel fulfilled in my work? Where am I going to be needed? I think enjoyment is important, but the idea, and I spoke about this in my first video for sure, is that the idea of like just following your dream or your passions, it's a good one in theory, but I think that just as one side of the spectrum, perhaps of an older generation bygone, really emphasized doing X, Y, and Z for your career at the expense of happiness, I think that the other side of the spectrum also is getting things wrong as well, because the reality is it's not getting any easier for you guys to buy houses. It's not getting any easier for you to find jobs. Things are getting more expensive with inflation. It's a tough world for people our age, and for those of you watching who are younger, it's going to be a tough world for you guys as well. So you really have to think about, what can you excel at? What are you naturally skilled at? Because I think that you'll find if you can excel in a field, even if you're feeling like it's not as, enjoyable at the start, I think you're going to realize down the road that you're going to have a lot more autonomy in that field. You're going to just feel more proud of your work if you are just genuinely better at it. And then you're going to have more time and more money to pursue the things that might be, more of your actual passion projects. That's not to say that I don't value, taking care of your sanity, your enjoyment, your happiness. You obviously can't be hating what you're doing. And obviously for me, I ended up doing, what I was more drawn to, right? So I can't speak on one end of the extreme either, right? I'm just giving you guys more of a reality check, maybe a second thing to consider here. Because while I did pursue what I really cared about, I also knew that I was very good at it, and I knew that I could make a lot of money doing it. So that is like the dry kind of quantitative way to look at things. Now, if you are someone who, your parents can afford to pay for your college experience, finances are not necessarily the biggest of your worries. I'm not advising to major in underwater basket weaving or, gender studies or anything like that. But you might have just more leeway to be exploratory in school. And I would honestly say that you should end up somewhere where the major is of interest to you, but you also have opportunities on campus to network, to work on projects outside of the classroom. And this really goes back to a key point that I hit on in the first video, which is that you have to take advantage of the opportunities available on campus. And even though it might seem like things are moving a million miles an hour with classes, you need to realize that your GPA is not the end-all be-all when you're in school, within reason, of course, and that you need to actually develop skills. Developing skills, building who you are, building your ability to network with different people, your ability to interact in the world and actually find your place is so much more important than whatever your grades are, or staying in school for the sake of just an extra degree, just for the sake of it. Because the fact of the matter is, I think that this current academic system is really failing us. And it's not just failing the kids who are, not as intelligent. It's failing, intelligent kids too. I think that a lot of people, if you're trying to decide between, going to a certain university or going into a trade, for some of you that might be more beneficial to go into a trade, and you might be making six figures, at the same age that your friends are still in school, or they're paying, their entire paycheck that they get from Goldman Sachs to a 700 square foot studio in New York City. It's ridiculous. It's truly a scam in many situations. And that's me having experienced the pinnacle of like academic success in this country. I'm very thankful for my experience at MIT, and I'm very grateful that it was so formative for me, but some people don't get that lucky. For example, I have friends who went to schools like NYU or BU or BC, where tuition is even more expensive than somewhere like MIT or even Harvard. It's like 60, and I think NYU is like almost $70,000 a year, right? So it's the piece of paper is not it's not as valuable perhaps as it once was. So really being selfish and taking advantage of what's available to you on campus to build you and not necessarily just focus so much on getting the approval of professors and the grades and all that is really important. Like the most successful people I know from MIT, the most successful ones I know are the ones who maybe like got a couple like C's on exams or maybe got B's in some classes and like didn't really max out what they did in school necessarily, but as soon as they left their last lecture for the day, they were going to this meeting or this lab or this club or this group where they were working on like real world problems. Like they were like, okay, we have this project we really want to do and it's going to keep us up all night and I have an exam tomorrow that I'm probably not going to do well on. Fuck it, because this matters more. And it did. Like one of my fraternity brothers now has this massive startup in Nigeria that's essentially connecting, like farmers to investors and companies. And I'm probably butchering it. So Isaiah, if you're watching that, I apologize for that. But like those are the people who like really change the world, right? And you don't necessarily need to be someone who's changing the world, but just in terms of making sure that you are fulfilled one day, like if that is something you want to do, maybe going more that path is better than just, constantly stressing about your perfect GPA or, getting your straight A's or whatever. So, for me, I can't say I made the wrong choice with my major. I think I was just not properly equipped to really know what I wanted to do. And I think a lot of kids are left in that situation. And specifically, probably the more intelligent kids, applying to these schools are in that situation because academics did come so easy to them, where you don't necessarily have to form a genuine interest because you don't need to be super invested in order to succeed in something, in high school at least, whereas some other kids might have to be more drawn to something to succeed. And then when they realize what that thing is, they gravitate toward it, they go all in, they major in that in college, they become awesome at it, right? You don't need to be a 140, 150 IQ to be hyper successful in life. That's very clear in just looking at many examples in society, right? So it's almost nice to be in that situation, I think, where you have to be so invested personally in something to excel at it at a young age, because then you know what you want to do for the future. And the combination of just what I mentioned before, when you're just kind of naturally gifted at excelling and all this stuff, and then being expected, not necessarily, because I just want to debrief here, I was never pushed to take up a certain profession or major in a certain thing by my parents. They were great in just making sure that I kind of figured that out for myself. So I'm very thankful for that. But a lot of people do have that pressure, right? They have the pressure of you need to do this, you need to do that. And I think for many, that pressure combined with never really having like something that they're personally invested in, you get to school as this hyper intelligent kid and you've never really been exposed to what chemistry really is in the real world, what physics really is in the real world, what statistics really is in the real world, etc. Right? So you're left with these 4 years of like, oh my God, like I have 3 years and counting to figure out what I'm going to be in the real world. And I have no idea. And I think that that's stressful. And I went through that. Everybody goes through it. And even though you're going to feel alone when you go through it, you're not. And, people are going to tell you you're not alone and you're going to brush it off because you're feeling it and you're going to learn yourself. And it's only going to be in hindsight when you realize like, damn, I really wasn't the only one going through this. I'm glad I've been equipped with the knowledge to deal with this and things are going to be okay. But like I said, your major does not necessarily need to be something you are absolutely in love with. It's great if the thing that you're in love with is also something you can do really good work in, something that you are going to excel at above your peers, something that is marketable in the job space. But I don't think that it necessarily has to be that thing that you're crazy about. Have something to show for your degree, not just your grades. Like, actually come out with some hard skills. And I definitely wish that I had more of that. So not to ramble too much more, because I think we're coming to the end here. But somebody did ask me, what was your biggest regret? And it really was what I'm talking about right now, as well as what I mentioned in the first video, which is that I did not take advantage of as many opportunities on campus as I could have. Obviously, I was significantly and deeply involved with the world of powerlifting, and without being involved in that, I wouldn't be able to do what I am today, which is coaching all of these incredible lifters and building a brand and having an actual viewership to ramble in front of this microphone to you guys. But I do wish that there was an opportunity in that pie chart to fit in, getting involved in some independent projects with groups of like-minded people on campus and have a product, have an idea, have something to sell. That didn't happen for me, unfortunately. And I'm not bitter about it. I'm very, very happy with where I'm at. But, if I were back in that time frame, I think that would have been a cool thing to explore for sure. But yeah, that was the episode for today. Like I said, I want to keep these short, and I want to be able to answer individual questions going forward so that you guys can keep submitting them after each episode comes out. We'll have new ideas to talk about. And like I said, there are a lot of you going through high school. There are a lot of you going through college. There are some of you who are even graduated, and you're in the position that I was in when I graduated. And it's stressful and it's hard, especially as someone who graduates from a top university. It's hard to find like people who were in the same place to give you advice. You usually go to your parents or your friends who, you maybe went to high school with, or your friends in your, for me, your friends in powerlifting, whatever. It's hard to find someone to truly relate to who can give insight that is pertinent and you feel like you're actually being, empathized with, essentially. So hopefully this video can help some of you who are going through that. But that is it for the video, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe. Remember, there are no bad days. And just one last thing, this video is sponsored by Jacked Factory. I have to put these because Jacked Factory has been very, very good to me. And honestly, if you're not a powerlifter, there are supplements for you to take. Whey protein in general is just good for your general health if you're having trouble getting in enough protein, and they taste amazing. Chocolate peanut butter, chocolate, orange creamsicle, all fantastic. There are also some focus supplements that I use that really help with being able to sit down and synthesize these thoughts very cleanly for you guys. So if you're looking for anything, go to jackedfactory.com, use code NORi. But like I said, that is the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see all of you in the next one. Take care.